My name is Jeremy, and before the storm that changed my life forever, I thought I understood what it meant to be alone. I'd spent 3 years working as a merchant marine, traveling the world's oceans with crews of men I barely knew, sleeping in cramped quarters and counting down the days until each contract ended. It was honest work that paid well, but it was also isolating, a career built on temporary connections and careful emotional distance. I'd chosen maritime work partly because it suited my introverted nature and partly because it let me avoid the complications of building lasting relationships. At 28, I'd had a few romantic entanglements that had ended badly, and I'd convinced myself that I was better suited to a life of independence and minimal emotional attachment. That philosophy worked fine until I met Sean McKenna, and everything I thought I knew about solitude and connection was challenged by a storm in the South Pacific that left us stranded together on an uninhabited island. Sean and I were both crew members aboard the MV Horizon, a cargo vessel traveling from Los Angeles to Auckland with a load of manufactured goods and automotive parts. It was supposed to be a routine 3-week voyage, the kind of straightforward shipping run that experienced sailors could complete in their sleep. Sean had joined the crew in Long Beach, taking over for a diesel mechanic who'd had a family emergency. He was older than me, maybe 35, with the kind of weathered competence that came from years of maritime experience. He was tall and solidly built, with dark hair that was always slightly tousled by ocean wind and blue eyes that seemed to notice everything around him. From the beginning, Sean was different from the other crew members I'd worked with. Where most sailors were either gruff and distant or boisterously social, Sean was quietly observant, professional without being cold, and he had a dry sense of humor that made even routine maintenance tasks more enjoyable. "You know," Sean said one afternoon as we worked together to repair a malfunctioning winch, "most deckhands I've worked with treat mechanical problems like personal insults. You actually seem to enjoy troubleshooting." "I like puzzles," I replied, trying to diagnose why the winch motor was drawing too much current. "Figuring out what's wrong and how to fix it is satisfying." That's a good attitude for maritime work. Half of being at sea is solving problems with limited resources. "What about the other half?" Sean smiled, and the expression transformed his normally serious face. "The other half is appreciating being in the middle of the ocean with nothing but water in every direction. Some people find that terrifying, but I think it's peaceful." I found myself paying attention to Sean's perspectives on maritime life, his stories about previous voyages, and his thoughtful approach to both work and the ocean itself. He'd been sailing for 15 years, had worked on everything from fishing boats to research vessels, and he talked about the sea with the kind of respect that came from understanding its power. "Have you ever been in a serious storm?" I asked him one evening as we stood watch together, looking out at the calm Pacific under a canopy of stars. "A few. Typhoon off the Philippines in 2018, hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, couple of winter storms in the North Atlantic that were worse than anything I hoped to see again." "Were you scared?" Sean considered the question seriously. "Scared? Yes, but also focused. In a serious storm, there's no time for panic. You do your job, trust your crew, and respect the fact that the ocean is always more powerful than your ship." "That sounds like hard-earned wisdom." "It is. Jeremy, the ocean teaches you humility whether you want to learn it or not. The people who last in this business are the ones who understand that you're always at the mercy of forces bigger than yourself." Conversations like this became routine during our overlapping watches. Sean was intelligent and experienced, but he was also genuinely interested in my thoughts and perspectives. He treated me as an equal despite having more than a decade of additional maritime experience, and he had a way of making me feel like my opinions mattered. 2 weeks into the voyage, we encountered the storm that would change everything. It started as a routine weather system, the kind of moderate seas and increased wind that experienced sailors handle without concern. But weather in the Pacific can change rapidly, and what began as manageable conditions evolved into something much more dangerous. All hands, secure for heavy weather. Came the announcement over the ship's intercom as the wind increased and waves began breaking over the bow. Sean and I worked together to secure equipment and ensure that everything on deck was properly fastened down. The ship was rolling heavily in the increased seas, and simple tasks became challenging as we braced against the motion. "This is getting serious," Sean said as we finished lashing down the last of the loose gear. "I've seen plenty of storms, but this one feels different." "Different how?" "The barometric pressure, the wave patterns, the way the wind is shifting. This isn't just a weather front passing through. This is a major storm system, and we're right in the middle of it." Over the next 6 hours, the storm intensified beyond anything I'd experienced. Waves that had started at 10 feet grew to 20, then 30, then heights that were impossible to judge as they towered above our ship before crashing down with devastating force. The MV Horizon was a sturdy vessel, but no ship is designed to handle the kind of punishment we were receiving. Equipment failed, power systems strained, and the constant battering from massive waves began to take its toll on the ship's structural integrity. "We're taking on water faster than the pumps can handle," reported the chief engineer during an emergency crew meeting in the ship's mess hall. "How long do we have?" asked the captain. "Maybe 2 hours before we lose power to the pumps. After that, it depends on how much more damage the hull takes." The captain made the decision that every sailor hopes never to hear: prepare to abandon ship. The next hour was controlled chaos as the crew prepared the lifeboats and emergency equipment. In seas this rough, launching lifeboats was extremely dangerous, but staying with a sinking ship was certain death. Sean and I were assigned to the same lifeboat along with 4 other crew members. As we prepared to launch, Sean grabbed my arm and spoke directly into my ear to be heard over the howling wind. "Jeremy, listen to me. Once we're in that boat, stay close, stay calm, and do exactly what I tell you. I've been through this before. The key is not to panic." The lifeboat launch was terrifying. The davits lowered us toward water that rose and fell 30 feet with each wave, and timing the release required split-second precision to avoid being crushed against the ship's hull. We made it into the water, but the lifeboat was immediately at the mercy of waves that seemed mountainous from our new perspective. The boat was designed to be unsinkable, but that didn't make the experience any less horrifying as we were thrown around like a toy in a bathtub. "Hold on," Sean shouted as a particularly large wave lifted us 20 feet into the air before dropping us into the trough behind it. For 6 hours, we rode out the storm in the lifeboat, taking turns bailing water and trying to maintain some semblance of course toward the emergency coordinates we'd radioed before abandoning ship. The other lifeboats had disappeared in the darkness and towering seas, and we had no way of knowing if they'd survived. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed, but we found ourselves alone on an empty ocean with no sign of the ship, the other lifeboats, or any hope of immediate rescue. "Where are we?" asked Rodriguez, one of the engine room crew. Sean checked the GPS unit and studied the emergency charts. "About 800 miles southwest of the nearest shipping lane. The good news is there are several small islands in this area. The bad news is they're uninhabited and not on most navigation charts." "How long can we survive in this boat?" "With 6 people and emergency rations, maybe a week if we're careful. Our best bet is to find one of those islands and wait for search and rescue." We spent 2 days rowing and sailing the lifeboat toward the coordinates Sean had identified as our best chance of finding land. The emergency sail was small and the rowing was exhausting, but gradually we made progress toward what Sean hoped would be a habitable island. "There," Sean said on the morning of the 3rd day, pointing toward a smudge on the horizon that gradually resolved into a green land mass. "That's our destination." The island was small, maybe 3 miles long and half a mile wide, with a beach suitable for landing the lifeboat and what appeared to be fresh water and vegetation. It wasn't paradise, but it was land, and after 3 days in an open boat, that was enough. We beached the lifeboat on a sandy stretch of shoreline and began the process of establishing a temporary camp. The island had coconut palms, a small freshwater spring, and enough flat ground to create shelter from the emergency supplies we'd salvaged. But our relief at finding land was short-lived. Rodriguez had sustained an internal injury during the storm that had been manageable in the lifeboat, but became critical once we reached the island. Despite our best efforts to provide medical care with limited supplies, he died 2 days after we made landfall. The loss hit the entire group hard, but it especially affected Martinez and Thompson, the 2 other survivors who had been close friends with Rodriguez. Within a week of his death, depression and despair had settled over our small group like a fog. "We're never getting off this island," Martinez said one evening as we sat around our small campfire. "No one knows where we are, no one's looking for us here, and we're going to die just like Rodriguez." "That's not true," Sean replied firmly. "Search and rescue operations continue for weeks after maritime disasters. We have shelter, fresh water, and food sources. Our job is to stay alive and visible until help arrives." "You really believe that?" "I have to believe that. And so do you, because the alternative is giving up, and I won't let that happen." But maintaining hope became increasingly difficult as days turned into weeks without any sign of rescue. Martinez and Thompson became withdrawn and fatalistic, spending most of their time sleeping or staring out at the empty horizon. Sean and I found ourselves taking responsibility for most of the daily survival tasks: gathering food, maintaining the signal fire, collecting rainwater, and keeping our emergency radio charged with a solar panel we'd improvised from salvaged materials. "Jeremy," Sean said one morning as we worked together to repair our shelter after a night of heavy rain, "I need to ask you something." "What?" "How are you holding up?" "Really?" I considered the question seriously. Some days are harder than others. I miss hot showers and real food and sleeping in a bed. But honestly, I'm okay. Better than I expected to be. Why do you think that is? "I think it's because I'm not facing this alone. Sean, working with you, having someone I can count on and talk to, it makes all the difference." Sean stopped working and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "It makes a difference for me too. Jeremy, I've been thinking about what happens when we get rescued, and I don't want to go back to being strangers who happen to survive something together." "What do you mean?" "I mean that these past few weeks have shown me something I didn't expect to find. Working with you, talking with you, facing this situation together. It's made me realize that I care about you in ways that go beyond just surviving together." The admission hung between us, honest and vulnerable in a way that felt both dangerous and inevitable. "Sean, I started, then stopped, unsure how to articulate what I was feeling. I know it's complicated. I know we're in an extreme situation that might be affecting our judgment. But Jeremy, I needed you to know that you've become the most important person in my life." I looked at Sean, this man who'd kept me alive and hopeful through the most challenging experience of my life, and realized that my feelings for him had evolved far beyond gratitude or partnership. "Sean, you've become the most important person in my life too. And it's not just because we're stranded together. It's because of who you are, how you handle challenges, the way you've never given up on getting us home." "So what does that mean for us?" "I don't know, but I know that whatever happens next, I want to face it with you." That evening, as we sat by our signal fire watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and red, Sean moved closer and took my hand. "Jeremy, can I tell you something?" "Anything." "Before this happened, before the storm and the island, I was pretty much convinced that I was better off alone. I'd had relationships that didn't work out, and I'd decided that maritime life and emotional connections didn't mix well. And now I think that the right person makes everything else worth the risk. You've shown me that partnership doesn't have to mean compromise or weakness. It can mean being stronger together than either of us is alone." I feel the same way. Sean, I've spent 3 years at sea trying to avoid getting close to anyone, and then I meet you, and everything changes. Everything. Everything. The way I think about work, about relationships, about what I want from life. You've made me want things I didn't think I was capable of wanting. Sean leaned closer, and I could see the firelight reflected in his blue eyes. What kind of things? A partnership that's based on respect and understanding. Someone to share experiences with instead of just enduring them alone. A future that's about more than just getting through each day. Jeremy, I want all of those things too. With you. When Sean kissed me, it was soft and tentative at first, then deeper as we both relaxed into the contact. He tasted like salt, air, and possibility, and when we broke apart, I felt like something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of what I wanted from life. Over the following weeks, as we continued our daily routines of survival and signal maintenance, our relationship deepened in ways that felt both natural and extraordinary. We talked about our backgrounds, our families, our dreams for the future, and our growing love for each other. Sean told me about his childhood in Maine, his decision to pursue maritime work after dropping out of college, and the loneliness that had defined most of his adult relationships. I shared stories about my own path to merchant marine work, my tendency toward isolation, and my surprise at finding someone I trusted completely in the middle of the ocean. Do you think we would have gotten together if we'd met under normal circumstances? I asked Sean one evening as we lay on the beach, looking up at stars that were more brilliant than anything visible from land. I don't know. Maybe we would have been too careful, too worried about the complications of dating someone from work. And now those complications seem insignificant compared to what we've been through together. Jeremy, surviving this experience with you has shown me what real partnership looks like. What does real partnership look like? It looks like someone who shares the work without being asked, who stays calm in crisis situations, who believes in you even when you don't believe in yourself. That sounds like you describing yourself. That sounds like me describing both of us. Our rescue came on a Tuesday morning 7 weeks after the shipwreck, in the form of a helicopter that spotted our signal fire during a routine patrol flight. Martinez and Thompson had been sleeping when the helicopter appeared, and their joy at the prospect of rescue was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from either of them in weeks. "Survivors on the beach," came the voice from the helicopter's loudspeaker. "We see you. Rescue boats are en route." Sean and I stood on the beach holding hands as the helicopter circled overhead, both aware that our rescue would mark the end of one chapter of our relationship and the beginning of another. "Sean," I said, having to shout over the noise of the helicopter, "what happens now?" "Now we go home. We deal with debriefings and medical evaluations and all the bureaucracy that comes with maritime disasters. And then we figure out how to build a life together on dry land." The rescue boat arrived 2 hours later, and the process of leaving the island was surreal after 7 weeks of isolation. The Coast Guard crew was professional and efficient, providing medical evaluation, emergency communications with our families, and transportation to the nearest port. "How long were you on the island?" asked the rescue coordinator as we traveled toward the main shipping channel where a larger vessel waited to take us to port. 7 weeks and 3 days, Sean replied. "And you maintained hope the entire time?" Sean looked at me across the rescue boat, and I saw something in his expression that had nothing to do with survival statistics and everything to do with love. "We maintained each other," he said simply. 6 months later, Sean and I were sharing an apartment in Seattle, both working for the same maritime company on a schedule that kept us closer to shore and each other. The experience of being stranded together had changed our perspectives on work, relationships, and what constituted a fulfilling life. "Any regrets?" Sean asked one evening as we cooked dinner together, moving around our small kitchen with the same synchronized efficiency we developed on the island. "About the shipwreck? About being stranded for 7 weeks? About falling in love with my fellow castaway? Any of it. All of it. I thought about the path that had brought us together, the storm that had destroyed our ship, the weeks of uncertainty and survival, the gradual realization that we were better together than either of us had ever been alone. None, I said honestly. Though I wouldn't recommend shipwreck and isolation as a standard approach to finding love. It worked for us. It worked because we were both ready to stop running from connection. The island just gave us the time and circumstances to figure that out. And now we build the life we talked about on those nights by the signal fire. Together, on purpose, with both feet on solid ground. As Sean pulled me close for a kiss that tasted like home and permanence, I marveled at how dramatically my life had changed since that storm in the South Pacific. I'd started that voyage as someone convinced that independence was safer than partnership, and I'd ended up discovering that the right person doesn't limit your freedom, they expand your possibilities. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen when you're lost at sea, and sometimes the best relationships are forged in the crucible of shared survival. Sean and I had found each other in the middle of the ocean and built something strong enough to weather any storm. I love you, I told Sean, words that still felt new and precious even after months of saying them. I love you too, he replied. Past, present, and whatever adventures come next.